Hello everyone and welcome to another video. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you my favorite books that I read in 2021. Now, I love filming this video at the end of every year. It's one of the videos that I look forward to the very most that I film, mostly because it just gives me an excuse to gush about the books I've already spent the whole year talking about. So this is going to be a list of my 10 favorite books that I read in 2021, and I am going to be counting down from 10 to 1. This year I was good. I did actually manage to pare it down to 10 books. Let's jump into the video and I'm going to be sharing with you my favorite 10 books that I read in 2021. Book number 10, and the very first book I want to speak about today is On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. I desperately wish that I owned a copy of this book. I need to go out and get one because I loved it so very much. I'm going to use that phrase a lot in this video, so I'm going to try and not say that every single time, but I borrowed this book from the library and I started reading it at like 8:30 at night. I was sitting there in the corner reading this book and I got to this very specific metaphor about an eye, and I was sitting in the library and I was like, I'm 3 pages into this book and I already want to cry. This is how beautiful this book is. On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous is essentially a young man writing a letter to his mother, and his mother cannot speak English. The book isn't at all plot heavy, so it's kind of difficult for me to explain the plot of this book, but really the book is a celebration of language and metaphor, and the writing is so very beautiful. The book explores themes about migration. The main character's mother moved over to America from Vietnam, and so it looks at her story and his grandmother's story as well, and his family history. And there's this really, really beautiful figurative language in the book that ties together imagery of monarch butterflies being bright orange fire and autumn leaves, and the way this sort of comes back to migration and tells this really amazing allegorical story. It's so very good. There's some really beautiful character development here. I really loved getting to hear about the main character. He gets referred to in the book as Little Dog. If you like a good plot heavy book, I'd probably recommend you steer clear from this one, but the writing in and of itself is just stunning. Book number 9 on this list is House of Hollow by Crystal Sutherland. This is the book that was recommended to me during the autumnal reading vlog that I filmed way back at the beginning of this year, because the bookseller at Matilda Bookshop said that it had some like really amazing Angela Carter vibes. It was quite gothic, it was really cool, and I loved the way that she described it. So I decided to pick this book up, and oh my god, absolutely loved it. This is a YA book set in the UK. It is about a teenage girl whose name is Iris Hollow and her 2 sisters. When they were young children, the 3 sisters were on holiday in Edinburgh with their family, and they were abducted suddenly on New Year's Eve. The girls ended up being returned to their parents a month later, but something was very clearly different about them. They had these scars at the bases of their throats, and a few months later their dark hair turned white, their eyes turned a different color. However, they did not remember a single thing. So this book kicks off a few years later when Iris is a teenager in high school, and her eldest sister Gray goes missing, and they think that potentially the same creepy force and reason why they were abducted in the first place has come back. I really loved the writing for this book. I felt like it was really decadent and beautiful while still being very accessible to a young adult audience. I had no idea what was going to happen. I loved the imagery. I loved that there were elements that were quite creepy in this book. The plot here is really fun. I felt like there was a lot of twists and turns, and I really loved the folklore elements in this book. If you do like Angela Carter's books, specifically The Magic Toy Shop, and you enjoy gothic literature in general, but you're looking for something YA, I definitely do recommend this book because I just think it was brilliant. It was so much fun. Definitely a good book to read around Halloween. Book number 8 on this list is a book I read recently, and it is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I read this book in my Secret History reading vlog that I did not too long ago. The Secret History, if you're not familiar with this very well-known dark academia book, is a story about a young man whose name is Richard Papin. He's in his 2nd year of college, and he has transferred to an elite New England university where he intends to study English literature. However, after he gets there, he stumbles onto this very small class of elite students who are studying ancient Greek. There are only 5 students in the class, and their lecturer is the very, very eccentric Julian Morrow. Richard ends up being indoctrinated into this very exclusive little group of students, and he ends up being drawn into their beautiful, decadent little world. However, as he learns more and more about these 5 other students, he starts to realize that maybe something terrible and ugly lies beneath the surface. This book is so clever. I love the writing. I think there are some just stunning passages of imagery in here. The way the classrooms are described with the teacups and dried flowers, and the way this world is depicted, this sort of very idealized image of what college should be be like for these elite English lit slash classical Greek students. Just it paints this really, really potent, beautiful image, and it really, really does suck the reader into this world. I loved that even though this book reveals the murder on the first page, it's still incredibly suspenseful. All of the characters are terrible, terrible people, and I absolutely loved getting to read about all of them. I loved how fleshed out they were. I loved how believable everyone was. Really loved the overall theme and meaning of this book as well, and so definitely recommend this book. It's definitely worth the hype in my opinion. Book number 7 on this list is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This is the first Susanna Clarke novel that I got to read. The thing that drew me to this book honestly was the cover. I thought the cover was incredibly beautiful. I love the hardback and all of the little like bronze foily bits, but I ended up being delighted by how unique and quirky this book is. Piranesi is a story about a man who lives in a house that contains the ocean. This is a very, very large labyrinthine house, and Piranesi believes that this house is the entire world. Piranesi, the main character, is sort of like an expert on this house. He pays attention to all of the tides and he explores the house. There are all of these really cool old decrepit statues and paintings and albatross flying through. Like, it's a really, really interesting speculative setting. I loved it so much. The book is really quite short. I absolutely flew through it, and it's this really beautiful epistolary style that felt quite academic. By epistolary, I mean that the book was written in journal entries. We have lists of citations and indexes and things like that in here, and so this is a really cool speculative one that I like to recommend for people who are interested in dark academia. Really weird and enchanting and unique and strange and so many other words. I love this book. I was so delighted by it. I really loved all of the Greek mythology references because I love Greek mythology. I loved the references to C.S. Lewis and Narnia in here. I just thought it was a very unique, strong, weird little story, but I loved it so much. Book number 6 is Lonely Castle in the Mirror by Mizuki Tsujimura. This story really beautifully brings together a Japanese contemporary lit style and theming with more speculative, fantastical elements. I really love Japanese literature. I read so many of them. Basically, this whole shelf up here you can't see, like half of it is Japanese contemporary lit. So I really loved getting to read something that was set in Tokyo and written by a Japanese author, which was a bit more magical and fairy tale-esque. The main character's name is Kokoro, and she is a student in junior high, a girl who has had a very negative experience at school and ends up staying at home because she can't go to school. While she is at home one day feeling incredibly lonely and isolated, the mirror in her bedroom lights up. She meets a little girl in a wolf mask who pulls her into the mirror, and Kokoro finds that she's in this magical, amazing castle, and she meets a whole bunch of other children who are in a similar sort of situation to her. The children are given the task to find a key in the castle. The person who finds the key, their wish will come true, but the second the key is found, the castle will disappear. The kids can all search the castle 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, and the story kicks off from there. I loved the social themes that this book explores. I really loved how it looked at community and bullying and trauma and the experiences of these children. I found the book very emotional and profound whilst being very fun and fantastical and magical at the same time. Overall, it was a delightfully surprising book. I really enjoyed the ending. I think this book would have been 4 stars for me, but I loved the ending so much that it pushed it up into being 5 stars. Thought it was wonderful, and I want everyone to go and read it. The next one on my list is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. This is a second Susanna Clarke book, and I'm not sorry for it because this book and Piranesi are so incredibly different. This is a book that I have already talked about to death on this channel, as I have with many of the other books I'm speaking about today. But this is a story about 2 men in Regency England, so around the time of Pride and Prejudice, who are trying to bring magic back to England. We have Jonathan Strange, who is this younger magician who's quite confident. We also have Mr. Norrell, who's this sort of snarky, stuffy, older magician who thinks everything should be done a very certain way, and there's a lot of very natural conflict between Mr. Norrell and Jonathan Strange. The style of it is so incredibly strong. It genuinely feels like you've picked up a Regency era novel. You can see that so much work has gone into this book in order to make it as strong as possible, in order to research the Napoleonic Wars, to get the voice of the story right. I can't even put into words how brilliant I think this book is. The story is very, very long, but I do think that it's worth it. There's some really beautiful passages of imagery here, but I really love how this book draws from fairy folklore, like Old English fairy folklore, and looks at fairies as being this sort of like nefarious and dark otherworldly species. And so there's quite a bit in here on the fairy roads and like fairy kingdoms and stuff. What's also cool about this book is that it's very structurally interesting because it has a lot of footnotes throughout. It feels like a very academic book. So much of the world building is done in these little footnotes where it speaks about like these particular magic books that were written by another person, and it goes on to speak about the Raven King. And I just think that this book was just so creative and interesting and well researched. I love it very, very much, and I think it is such a beautiful, magical story. Book number 4 on this list is actually not a book, it's a whole series, and so this is probably where I'm getting around the fact that this video is supposed to only be 10 books, but technically this is 3 books because it's a series. Anyway, this is the 5th season series by N.K. Jemisin. I was blown away by how amazing this book series was. I just listened to the audiobook one day on a whim because I'd heard some good things about it. Every single book in this series has won a Hugo Award, and I had heard a lot of amazing things about the world building, and so I decided to listen to it, and I'm so happy that I did. The first book, the 5th season, is told from 3 different perspectives, and we kick off with Esun's perspective, which is written in the second person. Just honestly excellent second person narration. Like, that's such a difficult narrative style to get right, but N.K. Jemisin did such a good job. We kick off with Esun, who is in a world where essentially the world has just ended. A really bad environmental thing, I don't want to spoil, I can't remember how much is revealed at the beginning, has happened and the world is ending. Things are about to be destroyed, but Esun doesn't care about that because she's just come home and discovered that her young son, her toddler, has been murdered and her daughter has been kidnapped. And so Esun sets off on this journey to go and find her daughter while the world is basically ending. I think this book series has some of the best world building I have ever read in a novel. Like, it was just so thorough and deep and interesting. I really loved how this book is a fantasy novel, but also in many ways it's a science fiction novel. It sort of blurs this speculative line between science fiction and fantasy. I loved the characters. I loved that this book was very emotionally charged. I felt so stressed so many times. I loved the characters here. I loved having Esun as a main character, particularly because she is a middle-aged mother. We don't get to see that demographic as a main character in fantasy very often, and so I loved Esun's character. I loved how nuanced and fleshed out her character was, and this series was so engaging. There were so many twists and turns. I absolutely flew through the audiobooks. I loved them to pieces. There is a particular plot twist in one of the books, and I will not say where. It was like nighttime and I was in the kitchen, I was listening to this audiobook and I was baking, and this plot twist happened, and I swore so loudly that my partner Tyler thought I had burnt myself while I was baking, and I had to be like, no, it's a book. I'm just listening to my book. It was just amazing. The quality was so high. The world building was amazing. Amazing characters. How many more times can I say the word amazing? Please go read the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin. Book number 3 on this list is also not a book. It's another series. So technically this list does feature 14 books in total, but it's my 10, anyway, it doesn't matter. This is His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman. Now, I read Northern Lights, I think at the end of last year, if I'm remembering correctly, but I finally read the 2nd and 3rd books this year, and I was blown away by how beautiful this book series was and how creative it was. The 2nd and 3rd books are so different from the 1st book. I was really amazed by what a departure they were from the 1st book while still being absolutely brilliant. I love the magic in these books. I love the world building. I love themes explored here and the characters. So the premise of the very 1st book is that we have a young girl whose name is Lyra. She is this delightfully boisterous and confident and sarcastic little girl who has been raised at Oxford College by all of these scholars, and one day her best friend Roger is stolen by a group of nefarious people called the Gobblers, and so Lyra ends up going on this grand adventure up north to the Arctic where she meets an armored polar bear named Yorick Bernison, who I absolutely love, as well as a bunch of other people. I love Lee Scoresby. He is an aeronaut. So he is a person who flies in a hot air balloon. There's all of these really interesting and wonderful creative characters in here, and we basically follow Lyra as she goes to try and save her friend Roger and meets all of these people and has a wonderful adventure. I loved how dark this book was. Like, I was so shocked that this book, which I think is actually middle grade, so it's not even YA, it's younger than YA, so delightfully dark. I was really surprised by how dark this book got. I loved how emotional it was, like the ending of this series. I think I remember crying quite a bit towards the end of the last book. I really loved this book series. A very good cozy book to read for the winter time. Book number 2 on this list is one that I read very recently, and so it's not actually one that I've spoken about very much yet, but it is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I cannot believe how much I love this book, and beyond that, I cannot believe how much I cried reading this book. Like, I actually audibly cried. Like, there was so, here is a photo of me reading the sad bit in this book. I loved this book so much, and what was really shocking about this book is that I really loved the movie Troy as a child. I didn't have a lot of access to Greek mythology content, and I love Greek mythology, but I really loved that movie when I was little, and I thought that I knew the story of Achilles, the Greek hero Achilles, who's very famous. You know, we have an Achilles tendon. He's very well known in popular media. I thought I knew the story of Achilles, and so I was like, I know it's gonna be sad. I know what's gonna happen. It's not gonna make me cry that much, but there was a significant plot point that I had forgotten about the story of Achilles, and that plot point absolutely shattered me. Like, I cried so much reading this book. I loved it. And I really love a book that will make me sob. There's a reason why, like, Pachinko, for example, is one of my favorite books of all time. That book made me sob, and this sort of has a similar level of just gut-punching heartbreak. I love it so very much. This is a story, if you couldn't grasp from the title, about Achilles, the famous mythological Greek figure. This story is told from the perspective of Patroclus. Hello everyone, this is Editing Christy here. For the next portion of this video, I will for some reason be pronouncing the narrator of the Song of Achilles' name wrong. When I was reading the book, I read his name as Patroclus. Now that is just my silly brain going ahead and inserting a syllable that didn't actually need to be there. His name is Patroclus. Which I realized because I went back and I rewatched Troy and his name is Patroclus, but I go ahead and pronounce it as Patroclus this whole way through. So I am sorry about that. Back to video, Christy. And Patroclus as a young boy is not everything that a prince is supposed to be. And so his father is very disappointed in him. He meets Achilles when he is very young, and Achilles basically symbolizes everything that Patroclus is supposed to be as a prince. He's athletic and beautiful and confident and all of these things that Patroclus wants to be. When Patroclus is around 10 years old, he gets into an argument with another boy, pushes him and accidentally kills him, and he ends up being banished from his kingdom and goes to live with King Peleus, who actually is the father of the titular character of Achilles. From there, Patroclus and Achilles begin to become friends. I think Madeline Miller did such an amazing job with research on this book. Like, the world felt so strong. It really genuinely felt like ancient Greece. I really loved the way that the speculative elements were woven in. I loved how Thetis, who is the nymph mother of Achilles, was woven in here because she is obviously linked with the gods. I loved how the relationship between Achilles and Patroclus was portrayed because it felt very real and honest and nuanced. I loved that this book ripped my heart out and stamped all over it. I love this book so very much. And then moving on to my favorite book of 2021. Can you guys guess which book it is? It is The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. I almost can't believe that I read this book this year. I think I read it in like January, February. We read it for our Patreon book club. Actually, 3 or 4 of the books on this list were read for our Patreon book club. And so thank you to everyone over on Patreon for having excellent taste when you vote for our polls every month. This book, oh my god, this book. I've spoken about it so much. Like, since I read it in January, I think I've mentioned this book a good 10 times at least. So I would forgive you for being sick of hearing me speak about it, because I have spoken about it to absolute death. This is by far my favorite book I've read this year. I cried so many times reading this just from joy. I've never cried from cuteness while reading a book before, but I did in this book. I cried because it felt so believable and honest and raw. Our main character in this story's name is Linus, and he works for the department in charge of the care of magical youth, who are essentially very bad. They take magical children out of their homes and place them in orphanages. And so there are a lot of themes in this book around institutionalization and why that's bad. And Linus is very depressed. He is an older man, he's on his own, he's quite lonely. Linus's job is to inspect these orphanages and make sure that they are up to scratch, that they don't need to be shut down. He doesn't enjoy his job. I loved the imagery. I loved how whimsical this story is. Like, I feel like if you liked Lemony Snicket, you'll really enjoy this story because it has the same sort of very whimsical vibe to it. Linus ends up being given another case at the titular house in the Cerulean Sea, so he brings his cat, he gets on a train, and he ends up traveling to this house and meeting these magical children and their caretaker. This book is kind of like a Pixar film in book form. The way the world was depicted was so colorful and magical. As I mentioned before, I cried from cuteness, I cried from joy. I loved the emotional honesty that Linus had. I loved that we got to see a character of this demographic explore his emotions, and there's just so much vulnerability from Linus that I really, really identified with. I loved his character because it really, really was profound and emotionally impactful. In addition to being extremely whimsical and cute and sweet, I loved the depictions of fatherly love and found families in this book. This book just felt like a warm hug, and it was incredibly comforting and so magical and enchanting, and I loved it to absolute pieces. I desperately want to reread this book. I actually read this as an ebook, and then I ended up going out and buying my own copy because I was sad that I did not own a physical copy of this book. And that is my favorite book that I read in 2021. Thank you guys so very much for being a part of my channel this year. Thank you to everyone who has commented and liked and subscribed. I cannot thank all of you enough for your support. I really appreciate it. If you want to share your favorite books that you've read this year in the comment section, I would love to read about them. Thank you so very much for watching, and also thank you to everyone over on Patreon for supporting my channel. We have a whole bunch of lovely bonus content over on Patreon. If you'd like to check it out, there's a link in the description down below. Take care everyone, happy holidays, and I will speak to you soon. Bye bye.